This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
This is The Roger Stone Show.
This is Roger Stone, and this is The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Audio Network. Now, I'm a veteran of 13 national Republican presidential campaigns. Well, actually 12, because I did bolt the party of Lincoln to support Governor Gary Johnson as a libertarian when the party nominated Mitt Romney. That was a bridge too far for me. I have eat, sleep, and breathe politics. I admit it. If you cut me, I think I would bleed politics. There's that great line from Mel Brooks' movie, The History of the World, Part 1. Politics, politics, politics. But I try to give it to you straight. I criticize Republicans and Democrats. I criticize the Mitch McConnells, the Kevin McCarthys, the Lindsey Grahams, as well, of course, as the Biden-Harris Waltz combine. But what we heard Thursday night on CNN, that wasn't an interview. That was a propaganda commercial. I mean, first of all, there was only 18 minutes. So from the time that Kamala has been nominated in a process in which not a single Democrat primary or caucus voter voted for her, the most undemocratic process possible, all we have heard is this 18-minute interview. No press conference, no one-on-one interviews with a serious reporter, and even here she needed her running mate Tim Walz, kind of like a support animal. I would argue she did even worse than he did in the interview. First of all, I have problems with the fact that it was conducted by Dana Bash. Dana Bash's husband, I should say ex-husband, was among the 51 intelligence officers who co-signed the letter that insisted that Hunter Biden's laptop contents, which was courageously reported in the New York Post by Miranda Devine, as well as in Breitbart News, was Russian disinformation. We now, of course, know that it was not Russian disinformation. Asked what the first thing she would do in the White House, she said that she would enact a child tax credit. She voted in the Senate against a child tax credit. And the proposal for an expanded child tax credit, well, that's a ripoff from the Trump-Vance campaign. Actually, Senator Vance was one of the chief sponsors in the Senate for an expanded child tax credit. Then asked what other first-time priorities she would put forward as the new president. She talks about a home buyer credit, $25,000 to essentially anyone in the country, by the way, that includes illegals, who want to buy a home. So they use the $25,000 for a down payment, despite the fact that they probably can't service and pay the mortgage payments after that. We tried this once before, by the way. It was during the Clinton administration. Andrew Cuomo was the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. It was the subprime mortgage scandal. It crashed the entire economy. because when it came time to pay those mortgages, many of which actually had a balloon in the payment, those who had been essentially allowed to access this housing couldn't pay. It's a disaster. No mention last night of her capital gains tax proposal. This is where you would pay tax on the appreciation of your home. So if you had a home that, let's say, cost $250,000, and your home appreciated by $150,000 during the time that you owned it, even though you're still living there and you hadn't sold the house, you would have to pay taxes on the gain. Economists and economic analysts as diverse as Larry Kudlow, right here on the 77 WABC and Red Apple Audio Network, says this is a first step to a depression. Barry Habib, who is probably the country's leading mortgage and housing analyst in the country, echoes that sentiment. Then Kamala said that, well, she and Joe Biden had created 800,000 new jobs. Was she unaware of the fact that her own Bureau of Labor Statistics had to restate those numbers and ratchet them down more to 313,000 new jobs? And those jobs are overwhelmingly part-time jobs. In other words, the hours worked per week, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics keeps track of this, has consistently dropped. Then there's Kamala's new position on the border. Now, I would concede to you that the title of border czar was probably given to her by the media more than her official title, but it's really immaterial because you can see interviews on both NBC and ABC in which Joe Biden makes it very clear that Kamala Harris will be in charge of our southern border and the problem there. ABC's John Carroll, not a bad guy, but he's been trying to rewrite history on this point, claiming that he never reported precisely that which he reported. Then, of course, Kamala said she would have a Republican in her cabinet. Maybe she's thinking of Lindsey Graham. I'm not sure. That was a throwaway line. But the kind of Republican who would be willing to serve in her cabinet would be an establishment Republican who's probably not supporting Donald Trump for president. It was a throwaway line at best. She did manage to stifle her laugh. I give her credit for that. But the record of flip-flops here is extraordinary. Suddenly, she wants to, as I said, seal the border. She's for taking away the tax on tips. I believe she ripped that one off almost entirely from Donald Trump. And amazingly, given her role in the border, she's now pledging to hire, her words, hundreds of new border agents to crack down and secure our border. Simple question. Where has she been for the last 3.5 years? I watched David Axelrod on CNN afterwards. First of all, he repeated the suckers and losers claim, the claim that Donald Trump said that those who served in the service and died in the service of their country were suckers and losers. There's only one minor problem. Donald Trump never said that. There were 19 people present when it was alleged by General John Kelly, his chief of staff, who he ignominiously fired for incompetence and insubordination, and who came up with this canard only after he was canned. But 19 other people who were there say it was never said. That's how it's going to go, folks. Thanks for tuning in to the Roger Stone Show here on the Red Apple Audio Network. We'll be right back.
This is the Roger Stone Show.
Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
This is the Roger Stone Show.
This is Roger Stone, and we're back on the Roger Stone Show here on the Red Apple Audio Network. We talk politics, 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 and politics. As I said earlier, if I cut myself, I'd probably bleed politics. When I was much younger, I wanted to be an actor. My parents didn't think much of that. They said, come on, son, you should be a carpenter or an electrician or maybe a drywall man. They make a lot of money. My dad suggested that maybe I should become a plumber. He didn't mean the Nixon-type plumber, it turns out. But like many other Americans, I was tuned into the CNN interview with Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate, Governor Tim Walz, last Thursday night. That's all we've seen of her since she was undemocratically nominated in a process in which no Democrat primary voter in either primaries or caucus voted to nominate her. The most undemocratic process you can imagine. But I thought, frankly, that Governor Tim Walz fared far less well in this short interview, in which I guess he was there kind of like a support animal for Kamala Harris. But he had no good answer to the simple question of whether he has falsely claimed to have been in combat and whether he has attempted to exaggerate his military service record. He chalked it up to grammar. No, it wasn't a question of grammar. He's lied about being guilty of stolen valor. And the truth is, he has deliberately and cynically misrepresented his military service record, clearly, obviously, to further his political ambitions. Now, the Walz people and the insist that this is all just a political smear. And, of course, the mainstream media actually continues to insist that there's no evidence of what I say. But the most recent exposed example of Walz's stolen valor campaign comes from a speech he made on the 20th anniversary of the September 11 attacks as governor. Walz spoke about his time in the Minnesota National Guard. He actually said that he was in Iraq, but, well, he was never in Iraq. He said, and I quote, "I had the privilege of serving in the Minnesota National Guard. I stood one night in the dark on the tarmac at Bagram Air Force Base in Iraq and watched a military ramp ceremony as soldiers' bodies were being loaded into a plane to be rehomed to the United States." He may have been referring to what he had seen in Afghanistan, which is where Bagram Air Force Base is actually located. This guy can't even keep his lies straight. The only time he was in Afghanistan was when he went there with a congressional delegation in 2008. This is actually Walz's M.O. He wordsmiths his statements to give the impression that he served in war to sustain this war veteran facade. This guy's sophistry has been a staple of his entire political career from the outset. During a 2007 interview on C-SPAN, he nodded in agreement after a news reporter falsely claims that he was deployed in Operation Enduring Freedom in the early stages of the war in Afghanistan. Other times, Walz's deceptions are more subtle. He stated during the C-SPAN appearance, "I deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. My battalion provided security in the early stages of the war in Afghanistan." The context of that comment makes it appear like he fought in Afghanistan. But those are weasel words, you see, in support of. In fact, he was stationed in Italy, far from the action. He also, in some of the most blatant and despicable acts of stolen valor, claimed that he carried weapons of war. That's actually what Dana Bash confronted him on in the CNN commercial for the Harris-Walz ticket that showed that on Thursday night, I guess it was, and it was part of a disingenuous appeal to tear up about the abuses of the Second Amendment. He said, and I quote, "We can make sure those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at." I don't think it could be much clearer that he wants to end our Second Amendment rights. That's the right and keep and bear arms written into our Constitution by the founding fathers. His campaign simply put out a one-word statement saying that he, quote, misspoke. Walz has also been attacked for abruptly leaving the Minnesota National Guard before his battalion was scheduled for deployment in Iraq. Walz claims his timing just happened to be coincidental, pointing to his age and year in service in his own defense. Well, 24 years in the military is not an excuse because members of Walz's own battalion don't recall it that way at all. In fact, retired Command Sergeant Paul Hare told Alpha News that Governor Walz had disappeared, retired out of, and basically left his own troops high and dry. He left us leaderless. Command Sergeant Major Hare also said that Walz never fully received the rank he claimed, which is the Command Sergeant Major rank. He actually had challenge coins made that he could hand out in his political campaigns with that claim. All of these claims turn out to be incredibly false. I think that Walz is going to be perhaps even a larger problem than Kamala Harris herself. For those who denigrate or think that J.D. Vance, the vice presidential candidate, is not up to the task, they are sadly mistaken. And if there's anything for which I am buying the popcorn, it is that upcoming debate. Folks, don't go away because Colonel Douglas McGregor, who is a decorated combat veteran with an extremely accomplished record in serving his country, really thinks that we are on the brink of World War III and is going to join us shortly to tell us why he feels that way. Don't go away. This is the Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Audio Network.
This is the Roger Stone Show.
This is Roger Stone. We're back on the Roger Stone Show here at the Red Apple Audio Network. Our guest now is Colonel Douglas Macgregor. He is a decorated combat veteran and author of 5 books, a PhD, and one of the country's leading experts on defense and foreign policy. Colonel Macgregor is widely known inside the United States, Europe, Israel, Russia, China, and Korea, both for his leadership in the Battle of 73 Easting, which is the U.S. Army's largest tank battle since World War II, and as well for his multiple groundbreaking books on the military transformation. We are honored to have him. He has written an incredible piece entitled America's Reckoning with Reality. Colonel Macgregor, thank you so much for joining us here today on the Roger Stone Show.
Oh, thank you, Roger. I'm happy to be here.
You have been a lone and I think sane voice about our current foreign policy, where we seem to be careening to the cusp of World War III in at least 2 theaters, and still have substantial concerns about China and Taiwan. This piece that you wrote for the American Conservative, I've sent this out already to quite a few people, but give us some assessment of where America is in the larger scheme of things.
Hey, Roger, that's the critical question. And unfortunately, I don't think the recent conventions, Republican or Democratic, really address that question. That's not to say that I wasn't entertained, as I think many Americans are by the conventions, but it just wasn't as substantive as I would have liked. So that's why I wrote this. And primarily because I think millions of Americans see our society as experiencing a moral collapse. People know that divorce is widespread. Single parents are struggling to raise children. Drug abuse is rampant. Suicide rates, not just those among our citizens in uniform, high, but among Americans across the board. And then the rule of law seems to be completely collapsing. So the question I asked is it really a surprise that Americans doubt their institutions, their courts, even the leadership of their own armed forces? I don't think it is. And I think most Americans, and I say most, I'm talking about those of us who consider ourselves to be American citizens, American first, we feel disconnected from our collective national identity. We've watched our national monuments defaced or removed. And many of us feel shamed into isolation and self-hatred by the mass media, pop culture, and official Washington. Americans feel helpless, I think, is the right way to put it, to stop what they see as the free fall into nihilism, the belief in nothing, not justice or beauty or divine influence, just nothing. So I think Americans really think their homeland is being transformed into a wasteland. And more of us think that taxation without representation is the norm in all 50 states, not just in D.C. Voting for one or another of the main parties, Democrats or Republicans, doesn't seem to do much to arrest the nation's descent into chaos. And then the worst part is Washington think about it. I think we know they're not terribly interested.
No, I think the single best part of your article, which is much broader than just our feckless foreign policy, but the problem at home, is where you write, frankly, the uniparty does not care, speaking of this decline of America. While American wages declines and jobs dry up, Washington's ruling political class got richer from inside dealing and cronyism. Since January 2021, America's 750 billionaires have increased their wealth by $1.5 trillion. Like the political figures the billionaires picked to run the government, those 5,000 political appointees, these folks have no skin in the game. The last time I saw this kind of fundamental distrust of all institutions, meaning government, Republicans, Democrats, the courts, the media, was in 2016. We finally reached the breaking point where Americans didn't believe virtually anything that they were being told.
Oh no, Roger, you're an expert on this topic, and you're right. You know from personal experience that people are tired of it. When you find out that the 750 billionaires have increased their wealth by 1.5 trillion, while the rest of the population has seen a serious decline in their prosperity and wages, you got to ask the question: what is actually going on? I think it's actually closer to the America that Richard Nixon confronted in 1968, because as you will remember, by the end of and that was the beginning of the end of the Vietnam War, Americans had really lost faith in everything. And they also became disgusted with this passion for celebrating trashy, degenerate events. Right now, we've got the opening ceremony of the Olympics as a prime example. I mean, if you wanted to set out to just deface and degrade Christianity, Western values and beliefs, that's a perfect example of it. And if you raise objections, everybody knows you're suddenly a bigot, an extremist, an anti-Semite, a white Christian nationalist, any number of things. Although, admittedly, I'm beginning to get tired of it. And I don't know how you feel, Roger, but I look in the mirror and I say, yeah, I'm white. And, I'm trying to be a good Christian. That's not an easy thing to be, as anybody who's serious about it knows. And, yes, I'm a nationalist. I love my country. I'm trying to figure out what crime I've committed. I think Americans are tired of it. They want to know what's happening. Americans really want to know why they are living in a world where the ugly pretend to be beautiful and the beautiful are being brainwashed to think that they are ugly. Now, we obviously have this old problem. And this old problem is this diversity obsession. You can call it CRT, critical race theory, any number of things. But really, it's the politics of identity, the tribalization of America, which is by design being reinforced by Washington. It's no longer just a campaign strategy. It's now a reality, a permanent feature of American politics.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, I'm talking to Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who has put together an incredible paper on the decline of America and the problems we face. We'll be right back with Colonel Macgregor. Please don't go away.
This is the Roger Stone Show.
ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track, and ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
This is the Roger Stone Show.
Welcome back. This is Roger Stone, and this is the Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Audio Network. We're here with Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who is widely recognized as one of the country's leading defense and foreign policy consultants, but someone with a broader view about the current decline in America. He's written a terrific piece, America's Reckoning with Reality. You can see it at the American Conservative. And we were talking at the end of our last segment about the DEI policies in the hiring of our military pilots, which is almost beyond belief. Colonel, it seems to me it was interesting that when Robert Kennedy made what I thought was an extraordinarily selfless decision to abandon his own political ambitions, to put his own ego aside, to recognize that all of that hard work that he had done, first running as a Democrat, where they used the rules to kneecap him, then trying to run as an independent, where they used lawfare to keep him off the ballot. He identified three issues on which he made what had to be a wrenching decision to support and endorse Donald Trump. Those were war, on which you know perhaps more than anyone I know. Secondarily, censorship, which could be the largest problem in the country, because if we cannot talk to each other and we can't communicate, we can't solve any of the country's problems. And then lastly, the poisoning of our food supply, which is an undeniable fact. Look at the label, folks, of anything, virtually anything that you buy to eat, and you will find that it is laced with chemicals and additives that are not good for you. I think he summed up the three most important problems in the country. It's not that we don't have other large problems, but those three, to me, stand out.
Oh, absolutely. And it's something even more important that he symbolizes that, should give us hope for the future. It certainly is critical to the future of this country. Is he's saying it's time to unify across party lines, that we must be Americans and the Americans must come together to save the country. I think that's the ultimate expression of patriotism, and that's what I think Bobby Kennedy represents. And in connection with that, we now know that we spent $150 billion last year on illegals migrating into the country, and now we have serious problems all over the country with criminality. He recognizes that. President Trump recognizes it. And that's a good thing because we have to take those on. But to go back to your point of three issues, the endless wars problem is out of control. We jump from one region to the next region with the intention to provoke and create conflict. It doesn't make any sense. That's not what we Americans have ever been about. On the contrary, we've been about prosperity and security here at home. And in this article, I tried to say that, we've got a couple of things happening. We've got this crazy notion that we should be fighting to destroy Russia, which makes no sense since Russia has not been our enemy or opponent since the collapse of the Soviet Union. And more important, that we should now spread this disastrous and tragic conflict in Gaza to the entire region. We've got to intervene and stop these things. We can't go on like this. We're already bankrupt, although nobody really wants to admit it. So, those are very important points. But then we come to the real crux of the matter, as you rightly point out. You know this very well. Free speech. How much more important is anything in a free society than free speech? And I think Bobby Kennedy has had the unfortunate experience of being censored, but a lot of us have, and you in particular have faced that. That is frankly, I regard that as part of the freedom that we're given at birth. We have to be able to stand up and express our views. We have to have a voice that's heard. And that's one of the reasons that, I'll just briefly point out that next week, One Truth Media, which is a parent organization of Our Country, Our Choice, where I'm the CEO, is launching a new platform called Republic, which is designed to be the ultimate free speech instrument. It's a place that you can join. You have to pay a fee, obviously, to get on there, but it costs nothing for any citizen to simply go on Republic and read what's there. But if you want to contribute directly yourself, if you want to take action, and there are opportunities for actions where you can address politicians, activists like yourselves, people in local government, then certainly you can do that. But I think the bottom line is that we're trying to build something, or at least Republic is, that is as cancel-free as we can make it. And I know you're part of this, Roger.
Yeah, this is an important. First of all, I want to point out this is a nonprofit. We're in this for the country. I'm fully signed up. It's called Republic. I'm going to be posting about it and talking about it more, and we're going to have Colonel McGregor back on to talk about it because we have to find a way around the censorship. There's only two ways around that, and that is if those on the center right or other billionaires go out and buy media properties, radio stations, cable TV networks, and so on. That's one way to ensure that you get balanced coverage, but that has not happened. And the internet has revolutionized our communications any way you slice it. I'm very excited about Republic. United We Stand is our slogan. We're going to be telling you a lot more about that in the weeks ahead, but I'm very excited about the project. And again, a nonprofit, we are doing this for the country to try to build a network where people can talk to each other, because they're making that increasingly difficult with this war of censorship. Doug, you're right about one thing. I mean, I'm still banned for life on Facebook, banned for life on Instagram, banned for life on TikTok, although that doesn't bother me much because I don't really want the communist Chinese to have access to all the information on my telephone. But it is harder and harder to communicate. And although it's a great thing that Elon Musk bought Twitter and transformed it into X, and it is certainly more of a free speech platform than it was. It's still not perfect, but it is getting better and better. It's interesting to me that you've seen a situation in which they thought they would end Tucker Carlson's career. And by the way, your interview with him, Colonel, was absolutely amazing. For anybody who hasn't seen it, I urge you to pull it down and take a look at it. But they thought they would destroy his career when he was fired at Fox, and instead all they did was turbocharge it. He gets literally millions and millions more viewers on X and through his own network than he ever got on Fox.
Well, the good news is that Tucker Carlson, you, Roger, and a host of others who have weathered the storm over many, many decades are people with skin in the game. You know, I like that phrase. Nassim Taleb, who talks about finance primarily, points out that a lot of the people that are doing damage to us in the financial sector, they don't really have skin in the game. And the problem in Washington is that most people there don't seem to have any skin in the game. They're living on the largesse that has been created for them over many, many years. We, on the other hand, we have skin in the game. It's desperately important to us that our republic be saved, that our society survive. And if anybody thinks I'm exaggerating, they're wrong. All you have to do is look at Denver this morning, the crisis in Aurora, California, where illegals have effectively taken over an area, an apartment complex, are barricading themselves. This is incomprehensible. We have invited people inside our society who are terrorizing us. Now, we bomb terrorists overseas. This government refuses to deal with terrorism right here inside our own society. Instead, they seem to be happy that we Americans are being terrorized.
Colonel, I have to ask you a military question. You sent me this text the other day. It speaks to the news that we keep getting regarding the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. You said, Zelensky just added another 8,000 troops to his failed penetration of Russia. They've lost 4,500 men, along with 63 tanks and 100 AFVs. The Russians have pulled back to allow additional Ukrainian troops to enter the fire pocket where they will be annihilated. You just cannot make this stuff up. Tell us about that.
Oh, listen, Roger, I'm glad you brought that up. That is a terrible disaster. This was essentially a PR stunt by Zelensky to try and persuade people in the West that he and his corrupt government are worthy of further investment. The truth is, somewhere between 12 and 15,000 Ukrainian troops crossed the Russian border where there simply wasn't substantial opposition, and in an area where there are very few people who live. People don't understand in Russia, you go from city to city in many cases, but you have very few people that live between small villages. This area is dense forest and swamp and river. Well, right now, I think the numbers that you cited are no longer accurate, because now we think they've lost as many as half or more of the troops that went in there to begin with. And the few soldiers that are left on the ground, and that unfortunately consists of some Polish as well as American and British in Ukrainian uniform, are in isolated little groups. spread along this one long road that penetrates into Russia. They've cut them off. They can't get out. They can't be reinforced. So they have a choice. They can surrender or be destroyed. And I think most of them are being destroyed.
I am pleased and very proud to have Colonel McGregor with us today. He can be found on X, where he is Douglas A. MacGregor. That's MacGregor. You can follow him there. We're going to be talking a lot more about the organization he is helping put together to link citizens who want to save this country, a republic. We'll talk about that. I cannot wait to have you back, Colonel. Thank you so much for joining us on The Roger Stone Show.
This is The Roger Stone Show.
This is Roger Stone, and you're back on The Roger Stone Show here on the Red Apple Audio Network. You know, until you yourself have been targeted by an all-powerful, completely funded federal government, when you've been targeted in a criminal action, and in fact you've done nothing whatsoever wrong, it's an experience that is very, very hard to describe. The man we're going to talk to now is in that position today. Now, if you followed bodybuilding in the United States in any capacity over the last several decades, it's almost certain that you have come across a man named Amin Ali. He is called Guru Amin by his clients, considered an expert on nutrition, bodybuilding technique. Amin Ali, who I met 30 years ago as a personal trainer in D.C., has trained some of the bodybuilding legends like King Kamali, Dave Bautista, and Don Long. He's long been an influential and prominent member of the bodybuilding community for decades, and his bodybuilding and nutrition techniques are commonly used among some of the most prominent and successful ranked bodybuilders in the country. But then something very strange happened. Roughly in March of 2021, Amin Ali, who joins us today, had become roommates with a Colorado business owner named Jim Tamagani, I think I said that right, who owns and operates a business called the Red Pill Reset. Now, Jim's business is based around helping clients improve their health by selling and administering an all-natural substance to his clients called Ibogaine. This substance is used as part of a health regimen that many people claim will help clients get their freedom back. In other words, it's an excuse, it's a substitute for drugs like Xanax and Prozac. This is a legal all-natural supplement that is legal in the state of Colorado. In 2021, Ali and Jim's roommate died after he was administered a dose of Ibogaine, a man named Andy Heyman, who had signed up for Jim's protocol. After this fellow Tagamini administered Ibogaine, the man began having convulsions. Law enforcement officers and paramedics were called to the scene, and unfortunately, the patient was declared dead. An autopsy conducted by the state of Colorado after the death of Mr. Heyman revealed that he had died of a pulmonary embolism. A fundraiser posted by his own family insisted that he died of a pulmonary embolism due to an elbow surgery that he'd had 3 days prior to receiving the entirely legal Ibogaine treatment. Initially, the state's toxicology report no traces of Ibogaine in Mr. Heyman's blood. In fact, however, Amin Ali, who is then charged by the federal government in connection with the death of Mr. Heyman, despite the fact that Amin Ali never had, never possessed, never sold, and never administered this all-natural substance to the deceased. He has been charged, and now with a 9-year-old son, for which he is essentially a single parent, and having run through all of his savings, his business having been destroyed by the negative publicity, he has been evicted from his apartment. He has had his cell phone cut off, and he is actually indigent. Now, what really bothers me about this story, before we get to Amin, is the fact that because he was indigent, he went to 2 public defenders. Those public defenders spent 16 months preparing a case for his defense. They contacted and identified multiple medical experts who say that a person cannot, literally, it is medically impossible to die from an overdose of this all-natural substance. Yet federal prosecutors have sealed all the records in this case so that we cannot see them. This is really extraordinary because now, today, Amin Ali faces the possibility of life in prison for a crime that he did not commit. Amin Ali, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Thank you so much for having me, Roger. I appreciate this.
I know this is a very difficult time for you. I know that you have turned your burden over to the Lord, that you are praying for help. It's interesting to me that you are a follower of Andrew and Tristan Tate, very controversial, but Andrew Tate's a former kickboxer, and they preach to men masculinity, self-responsibility, fitness, sobriety, spirituality. They are, I learned about them from you, Amin. They sent $10,000 to your legal defense fund, for which I'm very, very grateful. But tell us about this nightmare.
Well, as you said, it started back in 2021. Jim Tamagini was my roommate, and he was conducting this red pill reset business out of the house we were living in. Andy Heyman had decided to do this treatment with him. Andy Heyman came over, received the treatment, and shortly afterward, he died. And the paramedics ruled his death as a natural cause. They ruled it as a pulmonary embolism. Everyone ruled it as a pulmonary embolism. And then months later, in August, they came back with a test that showed that there could have been something that might have resembled ibogaine. Again, it wasn't 100% identification. And with that, they ran over a year-long investigation and came up to the conclusion that I had some involvement in the distribution of this substance, which I had no involvement in.
What really bothers me, I guess, the most is that because you're indigent, you went to 2 public defenders. I actually met with them. For 16 months, they prepared your case, claiming that there was more than reasonable doubt in the state's case, identifying multiple medical experts who insisted that it's medically impossible for a person to die from a minute dose of ibogaine, and that the levels of ibogaine in the limited discovery that the state did supply to them really left a very weak case by the government. But then, shockingly, 2 weeks before you were going to go to trial for your life in August, they came back to you and said, "We've changed your mind. You must plead guilty. You have to accept a sentence of 15 years to life. The judge will not allow you a continuance. The judge will not allow you to seek new counsel. that we can't be fired. You really have no choice.
Correct.
None of that was true. Your mother. Go ahead.
With the last money that my family had, we were able to secure a lawyer who was recommended by a very close friend of both of ours. And this lawyer reviewed the case and discovered that the case was very weak. In fact, there was zero evidence to prove that there was any death related in Ibogaine whatsoever. And with that, we were given some hope and decided to try to hire a lawyer and beat this case as should be.
I'm going to be more candid about this. Your mother went out and borrowed $10,000 to find a local Colorado attorney whose limited involvement was to get you a continuance until October. God bless her.
That's right.
But the most incredible thing here is why. First of all, they raided your home, claiming during your probation awaiting trial that you had violated the terms of probation because you possessed a gun. Amin, do you own a gun?
This is entirely fabricated. As a matter of fact, I was incarcerated for a week only to show up in court and have me sign a paper that said that I'm not supposed to possess a firearm and that there was no firearm. They admitted there was no firearm. So I was falsely arrested for 7 days for, in fact, nothing.
And I point out your 9-year-old son was there for your arrest. By the way, he's an amazing kid in himself. His name is Ozzy. He's a chef. He's an amazing chef. He's got his own little show on YouTube. He's a great kid. By the way, I confess that I am his godfather. This is the Roger Stone Show. If you're just tuning in, we're talking to Amin Alai, a man fighting for his life in the federal courts in Colorado, and we'll be right back.
This is the Roger Stone Show. This is the Roger Stone Show.
And we're back. This is the Roger Stone Show here on the Red Apple Audio Network, and we're talking to Amin Alai. He's a legend in bodybuilding circles, but he finds himself charged with a federal crime in connection with the death of a man named Andy Heyman, a death that he has literally nothing whatsoever to do with. Heyman's own family insists that Amin Alai is innocent, but he is going to trial in October. Thanks to Andrew and Tristan Tate, who have widely publicized the case of Amin Alai. He needed $100,000 and some odd $1,000 to hire a criminal defense lawyer in the last week. That money has actually been raised. People can go to Give, Send, Go, and you look up Save This Innocent Man from the Matrix. That's at GiveSendGo.com because we don't have enough to pay for the medical experts who can testify that Amin Alai is in fact innocent. But the question that comes down here is why? In other words, I understand politics and I smell the stench of politics here. It is not incidental that your arrest comes only, I believe, 1 week after the state of Colorado specifically legalized Ibogaine as a supplement that people can use in their own health regimen. But now, this November, there's a question on the Colorado ballot that would make Ibogaine illegal. Now, who would want to make Ibogaine illegal? I can tell you, Big Pharma. Because you see, if you can buy an inexpensive, all-natural supplement that helps relax you, that helps you deal with anxiety, well, then you don't need Klonopin. You don't need Valium. You don't need a Xanax. So my theory here, Amin, is they seek to make you the poster boy for their November campaign. Even if it means that you have to spend the rest of your life in prison, and I'm not sure what happens to your 9-year-old son, Ozzy. You lost his brother to cancer less than a year ago. So you've been through enough. Unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about that heroic effort because you and your family really did everything humanly possible to prolong his life. He lived much longer than the doctor said he would, but tragically, your son's brother has passed. Now you are facing this horrific ordeal. Do you agree with me that this is really about politics?
I believe so. I think what happened is the Department of Justice and the DEA lost the war on marijuana. Marijuana is still federally a Schedule I drug, which has been pretty much decriminalized for medical use or recreational use in almost every state in this country. And now they see this new wave of legalization coming with psychedelics, psilocybin, ibogaine, which is mainly used for addiction. So it can help people with their addiction to whether it's Klonopin or opiates. It's mainly used for opiate addiction. And who would tend to benefit from this? Well, the DEA would, because if they keep this flood of fentanyl coming in and everybody's addicted to fentanyl and they have no way of getting off of it, and ibogaine would get people off that fentanyl, then that would kind of tap into their money. So what they're trying to do is, in essence, not lose this battle. And they want to use me to say that this stuff kills people, and then therefore they can make it illegal. And when in fact it should be legalized in all the states so that we can help people beat addiction.
It is, I think, an exercise of raw power in which you are sadly the victim. Let me mention that all of this happened over 3 years ago. There is no complainant. Andy Heyman, the poor deceased man's family, has not complained. They don't believe the charges against Amin Ali. Then he's led down the primrose path by two federal public defenders who assure him for 16 months that he has a solid defense, only to tell him that he must plead guilty, that he has no choice but to plead guilty. Thank God we have found you new lawyers, and media coverage of this case brought in $100,000 towards a goal of $200,000 to not only mount an effective legal defense. Folks, again, can go to GiveSendGo.com. GiveSendGo.com. Look up Save This Innocent Man from the Matrix. The Matrix, of course, is what followers of Andrew and Tristan Tate call the political media establishment. This is a heart-wrenching story. Folks, please go to GiveSendGo.com and find the page that says Save This Innocent Man from the Matrix. Amin Ali, Guru Amin Ali, bodybuilding legend. Thank you for joining us today on The Roger Stone Show.
This is The Roger Stone Show.
This is Roger Stone on The Roger Stone Show here on the Red Apple Audio Network. And now I'm pleased to be joined by Greg Kelly, who is a longtime journalist, television personality, and military veteran who served his country with distinction. He, of course, helms the Greg Kelly Show right here on many of these same networks. I met him back when he was hosting Good Day New York for Fox in New York, when I learned that he was one of the best dressed gentlemen I've ever met. He has appeared multiple years on the international best dressed list that I turn out every New Year's Day. Greg Kelly, thank you so much for joining us on the Roger Stone Show.
Well, thank you, Roger. And it's a good thing we're not on TV right now because I look like an unmade bed. I know how to turn it on at times, but I can be rather casual, and I am right now. It's great to be with you.
Well, right now I'm wearing a Roger Stone Did Nothing Wrong t-shirt and a pair of shorts.
Available, I think, wherever Roger Stone apparel is sold.
StoneZone.com.
I love it.
Thank you. You have an amazing career. You spent 9 years as an attack pilot, United States Marine Corps. You have gone on to be a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps Reserve. You're a graduate of Fordham. You're a very, very smart guy. I love doing your show. But you also have a keen sense of political analysis. So I have to ask you, what did you think of that? I guess you could call it an interview. I thought it was more like a commercial aired by CNN on Thursday featuring Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
Wow. It was, thank you, Roger, but it was fascinatingly bad. It was fascinating, but fascinatingly bad. It was also kind of fascinating in how boring it was at the same time. Look, I think Kamala Harris, forget politics for a moment, and I say this with compassion, I believe I think she has addiction issues. I've talked to many people about this. Some people, there's something going on here. She was way too relaxed, almost slumped over. Somebody described it as if she had been pulled over by a police officer and they started asking her questions about the economy. And she was kind of like, that's the kind of quality of answer you would get. It was a total disaster. However, this interview has already been kind of downplayed. It's actually hard to find the complete interview online. There are clips here and there. This should be trending. It's a significant story right now, but I think they weathered the storm because they have this enormous political, kind of embryonic fluid surrounding them, protecting them at all times. But they do have a problem on their hands. I think this penetrates. This gets through to the people. She did not look at all presidential. You have a hard time even imagining her as president. And one more thing I'll say, Tim Walz, the stolen valor thing, I mean, that guy just double and triple confirmed that it is a genuine example of stolen valor. Dana Bash, who is marginal, not horrific, but okay, marginal, asked her a direct question about stolen valor, and his answer was a non-answer. And to me, and he was nervous. You could almost tell that he was retrieving the scripted answer. They both did that a lot. It was so obviously rehearsed. So I think they did they should have done tremendous damage to themselves. They did, all things being equal. The only concern I have, does this message get through? I think it does, but I'm not 100%.
What amazes me is the dual effort. On the one hand, she doesn't want to point out how Joe Biden was forced out of this race. She has to say nice things about him, which she did. At the same time, she has to pretend that she had no involvement whatsoever in his administration. She bears no responsibility for the last 3+ years that have destroyed the middle class. When she's asked, what's the first thing you would do as president? She says, well, she wants to stand up for the middle class. It is the spending policies that she has supported that have destroyed the middle class. And then she says, well, she's for a child tax credit. That's the first thing she wants to do. Well, she voted in the Senate against expanding the child tax credit, and she knows that J.D. Vance has actually been the leaders for an expansion on the child tax credit. But since that would require legislative action, she can't do that on day one. Day one are things you can do by executive order. For example, the executive orders that Donald Trump used to seal our border that were repealed by Joe Biden within hours of his being elected. And then the other thing she listed was this home buyers scheme in which we would make $25,000 available literally to anyone who desires to buy a home whether they have any ability to pay the subsequent mortgage or not. As I pointed out earlier, we tried this again. We tried this before. When Andrew Cuomo was the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Bill Clinton was president. It was called the subprime mortgage scandal. It crashed the entire economy, not just the housing segment, the entire economy. And then Dana Bash, I think she missed the boat when she didn't ask her about her capital gains tax proposal, which Larry Kudlow told me on his show last Saturday he thought would cause an immediate economic crash and even a depression. Dana Bash, I kind of think the joke from the beginning.
You know, Roger, you're amazing. You know, and one of the many things about you that's really outstanding. Not only do you know politics, you know the game of politics, but you also know policy. And that's actually fairly rare in our circles, and it's just tremendous to hear what you just went through. The day one thing, day one I heard I'm going to value the middle class on day one. Now, day one is an action oriented. I don't think she even knows that. There was an obliviousness to, day one means you can come in and start signing those executive orders. I don't know if she actually knows that in her state. She really seemed ignorant. And the other thing, it is an interesting dynamic between anybody who's running for president as an incumbent vice president, right? There's supposed to be that tension between, how do I establish my own identity? How do I establish the differences between my ostensibly my boss? That was an issue for Nixon in '60. Let's see, for George H.W. Bush, Al Gore, and the media generally really drive that. Dana kind of just barely touching it, barely touching it. So she's bad in every way, bad on substance, bad on style. I think she gets away with it in the short term. This is not going to seem like a huge story, but there's long-term damage from what happened last night. Long-term damage that we're going to see in the numbers going forward.
We'll be right back with Greg Kelly here on The Roger Stone Show, so please don't go away.
This is The Roger Stone Show. This is The Roger Stone Show.
And we're back. I'm Roger Stone, and this is The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Audio Network. We're talking to Greg Kelly, who helms the Greg Kelly Show on many of these same networks. He is not only a combat veteran, but a journalist, a shrewd observer of American politics, and, well, yes, one of the best turned out gentlemen on the face of the planet, having graced my international best dressed list, which I've now been putting out for, this will be the 16th year since the late Mr. Blackwell died. Greg, thanks for being with us today. We're talking about you can't call it an interview. It was more like a commercial that CNN aired the other night with Dana Bash. Dana Bash's husband, of course, ex-husband, I guess, in all fairness, one of the 51 intelligence officers who co-signed the letter falsely claiming that Hunter Biden's laptop had all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. Kind of shows you, I think, where she's coming from. She certainly asked no tough questions. I heard no tough questions. I thought that Tim Walz fared even worse than Kamala Harris. I mean, first of all, there were the optics. She seemed to be sitting lower than he was, and the camera came in at her face rather than at her waist. It was very strange. I couldn't figure that out.
He also seemed a little bit nervous, like nervous not by the event, but nervous being around her. He was keen on exhibiting like a deferential kind of, excessively deferential, almost obsequious, nervous, giddy. There's the boss, everything the boss says is brilliant or funny and you have to do some of that in life. But I think the presidential debut, when you make that debut in a television interview, is like, hey, we're a team. This is a partnership. They did not look like a team. They did not look well matched in any way, and including temperament and style. It was and the weird setting in that square table that where did they get that? It was like a podiatrist's waiting room. It was the weirdest setup. Everybody, Roger, look, I know people. There are people out there, and medical marijuana is helping them. I understand that. But we got a lot of people who are smoking right now, are on drugs, who should be doing a better job and paying attention to detail, and they're not. And I am seeing all kinds of screw-ups, whether it's two planes almost colliding to weirdo spelling errors in a $30 book I just bought. Everybody has gotten sloppy. And last night was sloppy. The participants were sloppy. The staging was sloppy. The messaging was sloppy. All of it. And, I do have this hunch that a lot of folks are checked out. They're high as a kite and checked out. But it's kind of besides the point. It should be a disaster. I want to point out again, good luck finding this interview. There are clips all over the place, social, mainstream. Right now, the dialogue, they're not talking about it. I finally found the interview. I had to go to part 1, part 2, part 3. You had to click on 5. If you go to CNN, you can't watch the whole thing, Roger. You got to subscribe. You got to do this. You got to put in a password. And then they just have a bunch of clips. So they're burying it.
I think the purpose of this, the timing of this, was to try to stem the extraordinary momentum that Donald Trump got from the back-to-back endorsements of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., which I really believe is a watershed moment in American politics. And then almost immediately, the formal endorsement of former 4-term Democrat Congresswoman, former vice chairman of the Democrat National Committee, Tulsi Gabbard, who herself ran for president as a Democrat in 2020. I honestly think we could be on the cusp of the kind of political realignment that we had in 1932 under Franklin Roosevelt, that we had in 1968 under Richard Nixon, which ultimately forges a permanent majority despite Watergate, that manifests itself in the election of Ronald Reagan and his reelection to a second term. The media wants to downplay this and pretend that it's a fringe story. I think that's completely wrong. I mean, look, I am only an acquaintance of Robert Kennedy. We share the same publisher, Tony Lyons of Skyhorse Publishing. I read his book, The Real Anthony Fauci, which is very impressive. I shared it with many of my friends as a Christmas gift. I'm really impressed with him, though. First of all, his energy level, which is extraordinary, and the fact that I've never seen him in an interview or in any setting in which he made any assertion that he could not almost immediately back up when challenged with a study or other documentation. It is very, very impressive. And I think that he has tapped a vein in American politics where people, they are tired of both parties. That is the truth. He identified key issues, particularly the poisoning of our food, which you and I spoke about offline here, which we both agree with. Look, I used to think Hellmann's mayonnaise was the only mayonnaise in the world. If you came to a barbecue and you brought Kraft mayonnaise, I would bust your chops like there'd be no tomorrow. Then recently I read the label on Hellmann's mayonnaise, and it's full of all kinds of additives and chemicals and GMOs. I'll never buy it again. By the way, I found another brand, Sir Kensington's, all natural, great stuff. But like you now, I'm looking at anything I put in my mouth and taking with some trepidation. So he identified in the end. He puts aside his personal ambitions. He puts aside his ego. Why? What reason does he give us? One, war. The fact that the country is hurtling towards war. Two, the censorship, because there's a lot of Roger Stones on Facebook right now, folks, but not a single one of them is me, or on Instagram, or on TikTok, where I'm banned for life. Thank God for X, formerly known as Twitter, and Truth Social. But if we cannot talk to each other, if we cannot communicate, how can we solve the country's problems?
Totally concur. And I have met him several times over the years, going back about 20 years. And I have to be honest, I found him not as impressive as you did initially. I'm going back 20 years, and that's okay. I think he was still figuring things out. I think he had possibly a few struggles on his hands. I think he has come into his own in the most magnificent way. Before, I'll be honest, the voice kind of threw me for a long time. Is he healthy? What's going on with that? And then I learned what it was about. And then over the past, I'd say 2 years, yes, he's been so effective and so eloquent. And to hear him stand up, and, Roger, I'm in the conservative media space. You're in the conservative media space. I don't think you would say he was solely in the conservative media space. I mean, he wasn't getting much mainstream attention, but he's a Kennedy. He is, he had a reputation built outside of conservative circles. The environmental stuff. I mean, quite frankly, Sean Hannity would have him on and bang him around, and he was the butt of a lot of jokes. That happened for a while, but to hear him stand up and say out loud what a sham the convention was, how Kamala Harris's popularity, I think he said it's been engineered, a surge in popularity has been engineered out of nothing. Lights, balloons, nothing. 3 months ago, she was a joke. Now she's the nominee. To hear him say it, of all people, was incredibly refreshing, and to watch the mainstream media squirm as he was saying so much truth. They get very, very uncomfortable with it. I thought it was incredible, making the comparison, Joe Biden's America to Putin's America, to Putin's Russia. I mean, Putin did the same thing that Biden did to RFK, try to chase him off the ballot, the censorship, throwing opponents in jail. It shouldn't be America, but it is America. So it was probably one of the most impactful political speeches I've ever heard. And I'm very grateful. I have a reason to believe that you had a part in putting Donald Trump and RFK Jr. together. If you did, bravo. This is a beautiful partnership, and I think totally game-changing and a realignment, like you said. Roger, I was there on June 16th, 2015, in Trump Tower when he came down the escalator. I was there by accident. Rosanna Scotto was my co-anchor at the time. I was on local TV in New York. She was friendly with Michael Cohen. She tells me, hey, you want to go over to Trump Tower? Something's going to happen. I'm like, okay. So we go over there. We don't really know what's going to happen. Is this going to be a new game show or whatever? Comes down the escalator, and I was just entranced by Melania. That's the only thing I noticed. To be honest, I was like, who is that woman? And he gets on stage, and he makes that speech. It's an hour long, and I keep glancing at Rosanna. We don't say anything to each other. And I feel like I felt in my bones that this was history. He was going to win. This was a seismic change. I said so publicly immediately after the interview. Some camera came over. It was Access Hollywood, of all people. I said he's a total game changer, and with this message, he can win. And I was embarrassed that night because they made fun of me for saying that. That's like nobody was thinking that. And I not only did I think he could win, I thought he could win with a Ronald Reagan type majority because the message was that unifying. I know that sounds crazy, but I do believe this is a message that everybody can get around if you get beyond all the fake news and everything else. So may not happen this election, but by the time he leaves, this is going to be a very different America in a positive way. That's how I feel.
All right, I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Let me thank Greg Kelly for joining us today on the Roger Stone Show here at the Red Apple Audio Network.
This is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, here's Roger Stone.
Welcome. I'm Roger Stone, and this is The Roger Stone Show at 77 WABC Radio. We are indeed the crown jewel of AM radio. We are nothing less than the most influential, powerful AM radio station in the United States. And if you don't live in the greater New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area where I grew up, you can hear us worldwide by going to WABCRadio.com. We are live streaming in 163 countries worldwide. So there's never any excuse to miss any of the great programming here at 77 WABC. In fact, I urge you to go to the App Store on your phone right now and download the 77 WABC Radio app so you don't miss any of the great entertainment or talk programming that we have here at 77 WABC. There have been a number of significant legal developments in the ongoing tsunami of lawfare against President Donald Trump. And here to help us break that down is David Schoen, who is a criminal defense attorney, also an expert in appeals litigation. David very ably represented President Donald Trump in one of the impeachment trials on the floor of the U.S. Senate. He is a graduate of the Columbia University School of Law, where he got his master's degree. He is also a Juris Doctor at the Boston College Law School, where he graduated cum laude, and he did his undergrad at the same place that I tried to, George Washington University. David Schoen, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Thank you very much.
So we saw Special Counsel Jack Smith, whose appointment has been challenged by Judge Eileen Cannon, who ruled in the 11th Circuit, that's Florida, that his appointment was unconstitutional based on the fact that there is no law providing for his position, and that he was given these broad and sweeping prosecutorial powers without ever having been confirmed by the U.S. Senate. There's also a legitimate legal question about the funding of his investigation. But as I understand it, the ruling in one circuit does not bind the legal actions in another circuit, at least not until that question gets to the Supreme Court, which I guess we both expect it to do. Special Counsel Smith has said that he will appeal. I think he's filed his appeal with the 11th Circuit. Unclear what that panel will do, but this is a question clearly that will go to the U.S. Supreme Court. But then, in the wake of a disastrous debate and the Democrats switching out their candidate, in the wake of the horrific attempt on President Donald Trump's life in Butler, Pennsylvania, about which we still have more questions than answers, in the wake of Joe Biden's withdrawal from the race and the Democrat National Convention, in the wake of the historic endorsement of President Donald Trump by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and former Democrat presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard, Special Counsel Jack Smith filed a superseding indictment in D.C. Against President Trump. David, what's going on here?
All part of the same campaign that Jerry Nadler, frankly and probably unwisely, spoke about, and that is that they don't feel, the Democratic Party doesn't feel they can trust the voters, and they shouldn't rely on the voters. Therefore, they try all of these other measures to knock down President Trump and distract him from the election. So it's outrageous that Jack Smith did this. It was on the eve of a hearing scheduled in the D.C. case in which they were supposed to, each side was supposed to propose a schedule to the judge to determine how to parse through the indictment, to determine what are official acts and what aren't. That's the instruction that they were given, that she was given from the United States Supreme Court in the immunity case. So a number of things about this indictment. First of all, as you well know, there's this informal rule in the Justice Department called the 60-day rule. Some refer to it as the 90-day rule, but let's call it the 60-day rule, in which they're not supposed to take any action that could affect the election by bringing in, for example, a criminal case. So they're making excuses now by saying, well, it's not a new indictment. It's a case that's been around. It's just a superseding indictment. And now it's really up to the judge and so on. And they say we're not inside that 60-day window, but the election date is in November. That's complete nonsense now that we have early voting. The election's beginning in just a matter of days, really, with early voting, absentee voting, all of that. It's clearly done to affect the election. Shouldn't have been done. But he's still left with the same similar problems. That is, they're going to have to parse through this to determine what are the official acts. Now, one of the interesting things in the immunity decision from the Supreme Court was not only that a president can't be prosecuted for official acts, even within the outer parameters of official acts, but it also said that you can't use official act evidence to get an indictment or to put before a jury on other charges. And so Jack Smith is now saying, well, this new grand jury didn't hear the evidence earlier, which tells you that clearly the first indictment was tainted and could not have withstood scrutiny, because clearly he must have put forward official acts evidence before the grand jury. But here, it still deals with the communications with Vice President Pence and all that. And on that question, the Supreme Court spoke directly. They said, in their opinion, I'm quoting, whenever the president and vice president discuss their official responsibilities, they engage in official conduct. Presiding over the January 6th certification proceeding at which members of Congress count the electoral votes is a constitutional and statutory duty of the vice president. Went on to say those discussions, communications would be presumptively immune from prosecution. So you're going to have to deal with all of that. You raised a very interesting point, and that is Judge Cannon's decision that Jack Smith's appointment was unconstitutional, both under the Appointments Clause of the Constitution and the Appropriations Clause. As you know, and we've discussed before, President Trump's lawyers never raised that issue in the D.C. case, unfortunately, in my view. In fact, there was some interest in it by the Court of Appeals, and an amicus brief was filed by a distinguished professor and by Ed Meese. And when asked about specifically to address that, President Trump's lawyer said, well, we never raised that issue in this case. Same thing happened in the Supreme Court, basically. So we'll see now. There's a new indictment. They have a new chance for new motions. They might raise it. They think they're making a strategic decision, I suppose, not to. There's a D.C. Circuit case that goes the other way, but without much analysis. So as you said, the 11th Circuit's not binding. The 11th Circuit hasn't decided yet. Judge Cannon's decision is brilliant, I think, very well thought out. And she's a distinguished judge, notwithstanding all of the criticism she gets in the media attacking her. But yeah, so they also, what's surprising to me and disappointing, in this new indictment, they kept in the obstruction charges. They have no place in this case. The Fisher case, decided by the Supreme Court in June of this year, said that this section of the criminal law, 1815-12 C2, only applies obstruction with respect to impairing documents, the ability to use documents, records, or other objects like that. That's not what this case is about. This is a claim that in his speech, President Trump interfered with the election, and talking to Vice President Pence, he interfered, calls to Georgia, and so on. This isn't about documents. They wanted these counts in there, 2 counts under 1512, because they're 20-year counts. They shouldn't be in the case.
It was kind of obvious to me, the fact that this 1520 charge grows out of the Enron case. Whose idea do you think this was?
Well, you raise a great point, because what we saw before this case started was a model prosecution memo, so-called, directed to Lisa Monaco in the Justice Department and others. And behind that was purportedly Andrew Weissman of the Enron case, Norm Eisen, Joyce Vance, that whole crowd, Danya Perry. They wrote a number of prosecution memos, some on the others, for each of these cases. And they also suggested, by the way, and I think this is telling, that President Trump be charged with insurrection under 18 U.S.C. 2383. You'll notice they never charged him under insurrection, and they never should have. And that's the key here. When they keep saying he tried to steal the government, wouldn't allow the peaceful transfer of power, that would have been insurrection. They have no basis for saying that or for charging it, except to try to win an election. If the voters are smart and they recognize what went on here, President Trump should go soaring up in the polls again because of this indictment. It's the same kind of weaponization, and it shouldn't have been done.
Just interestingly, yet again, in her convention speech, Kamala Harris said, and I quote, "Trump sent an armed mob to the U.S. Capitol." That's simply not true. Nobody arrested in the U.S. Capitol or on the grounds was armed. The only folks who were armed those days were Capitol Hill police officers and other federal agents, but the FBI director can't tell us how many undercover agents may have been there that day. These people just continue to recycle the same lies. I watched David Axelrod last night. Now, he's a very smart guy. I think he really is the guy who made Barack Obama president, recognized his political talent, recognized that the American people were sick of dynasties. They didn't want any more Bushes or Clintons. He really is a very smart guy. But once again, he repeats this claim that Donald Trump denigrated people who lost their lives in the service of their country as suckers and losers. There were 19 people present when that was allegedly said, and every single one of them denies that the president said it. The man who makes this claim, General John Kelly, was ignominiously fired by Donald Trump for incompetence and insubordination, and only after he's fired does he come up with this canard, for which he is the only witness, a biased witness, I would submit to you. So we're looking at a situation in which they keep recycling falsehood after falsehood after falsehood. We have coming up the sentencing in the New York court before Judge Juan Merchan, but there are developments in this case as well.
Yeah, first of all, that never should go forward. He denied another recusal motion. I believe his recusal, his disqualification from the case, is absolutely mandated under New York law. There's no question that his daughter's interests could be substantially affected by the proceedings there. She represents Ms. Harris and so on. And now it's even more important for the sentencing because, look, we hear these cheers about lock him up, lock him up. There's great pressure to put in some kind of punitive measure against President Trump. And this Judge Merchan would love it. He's a Trump hater from start to finish. He has no business sitting on this case, period. That's for starters. But now this new development is yesterday, the Trump team filed a petition in federal court to stop these proceedings, and the case ought to be heard in federal court. This was tried once before in this case, and it's assigned to the same judge, Judge Alvin Hellerstein, who rejected it. There's a federal statute, 28 U.S.C. 1442 A1, that allows for the removal of a criminal case against a federal government official acting under or anything relating to act under the color of that office. And that's the argument they're making, that what he did, part at least of this case, relates to what happened when he was in office. And there clearly was evidence put on and evidence presented to the grand jury about things that he purportedly did while in office. It's also the subject of a hearing to come up, or a decision at least, before Judge Merchan, based on the immunity decision, what, if any, official acts were either presented to the jury there or to the grand jury. And that case stands alone because it's the only one that's gone to trial. And so any official act evidence presented to the jury would have tainted any conviction in the case. So they have to see what happens. It's very difficult to get a win with this Judge Merchan, but hopefully down the road, some court is going to, certainly a federal court will, when it gets to that point, but hopefully a New York appellate court will reverse the convictions in that case.
David, is it correct that the president cannot file an appeal until after he's sentenced?
Correct.
In the New York matter?
That's when the judgment is entered in the case.
Interesting. while we're still on New York, what is your feeling of the final disposition of the Engoron case? This is the valuation case, which was unlike anything I've ever seen. Trump was essentially declared guilty before he even had a trial, and the only purpose of the trial was to figure out how much he was going to have to pay in order to impoverish him. And then he was required to post an enormous bond just so that he could appeal the case. That doesn't seem very fair or democratic to me.
Yeah, I believe absolutely that case will be reversed for a number of reasons. Remember, they're dealing there with an executive law that calls it fraud, but it's the only situation for a fraud in which there doesn't have to be any material misrepresentation that was relied on to the detriment of any person. Here, the bank said they were great loans, we made money off of it and all that. But I'll tell you what to my view, is one of the biggest issues in this case, and I don't think the lawyers have raised it the way I would have raised it, at least. In fact, I know they haven't, and that is the denial of a right to a jury trial. The statute doesn't permit it. There's a case out of the same court in New York that said you don't get a jury trial under this executive law because it's really about equitable relief, about stopping a business practice, something like that, and damages are only incidental to the law. That's what the case says. Well, in this case, damages aren't incidental. This is a massive, massive damages judgment that couldn't be incidental to any kind of case. And interestingly, when this same law was used in a case in federal court, the federal judge said there is a federal right to a jury trial under this law. Now, the Seventh Amendment is what really gives the right to the jury trial in federal court, and that's not applied to the states, but the same reasoning that he used should have been applied here. And I think one of the primary issues here is that he was denied his right to a jury trial under the New York Constitution, and if not, then the law is unconstitutional if it doesn't permit a jury trial. There's a question here about whether his lawyers missed the date for asking for a jury trial, but I don't think there's a strong waiver claim here because it would have been futile to raise it since a court had already said you don't get a jury trial.
Fascinating. Let's go back for 1 second to the federal question because I think it makes a key point. What is the very fastest that Mr. Smith's D.C.-based charges could come to trial? So presumably he's now made a new motion. He's filed new charges. Those were he to be were that to go to the trial court, Trump would clearly appeal any decision there to the circuit. I'm familiar with the D.C. circuit. You can't really expect a fair shake there, but then would ultimately, presumably, go to the Supreme Court. Would this not take at least a year or longer?
It should. You know, I've had a case. I actually recently won a case in front of Judge Chutkan, the judge who has the case. You know, she's taken a very strong view against President Trump in this case. I had a great experience with her, but in this case, she's taken a tough view, and they seem to want to push it along. There's no way this case should go to trial anytime in the near future. They still have to resolve all of these fundamentally important questions, like any official act evidence that went to the grand jury and any official act evidence apparent from the indictment itself. That's one. Then the obstruction charge and stuff. They're going to have to litigate how under Fisher this can still be upheld. You can be sure they're going to try, the government, Smith is going to try to say, well, there were some documents involved here or there, like they do with the wire fraud statute sometimes to bring it within that. But it's not fair in this case. That wouldn't be accurate. That's not what this case ever was about, documents, records, or other objects like that. And that's what the Fisher court said. And then if the lawyers in this case decide to raise the constitutionality of Jack Smith's appointment, that also is going to have to be litigated in the case.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, this is the Roger Stone Show. I'm Roger Stone. We're talking to David Schoen, criminal defense lawyer who has ably represented President Donald Trump in one of his 2 impeachment trials on the floor of the U.S. Senate, and we'll be right back.
It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC. It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
And folks, we're back. We're talking to criminal defense attorney par excellence, David Schoen. I do want to remind you, though, to please go to the App Store right now and download the 77 WABC radio app. Because let me tell you, you don't want to miss Sid Rosenberg in the morning. You don't want to miss Larry Kudlow on Saturdays. You don't want to miss Frank Morano on the other side of midnight if you're a night owl. You certainly don't want to miss John Katsimatidis and Rita Cosby with the Katz and Cosby Show, because it's the best roundup. At the end of each day, you can find out what happened that day and what's going to happen tomorrow. And of course, Sunday mornings, they really set the table for the entire day of news coverage. I don't want to leave out my friend Dominic Carter. There's so much talent. There's so much entertainment. There's so much great talk at 77 WABC Radio. You don't want to miss any of it. So by downloading the app, if because of work or family obligations you can't listen to your favorite shows, you'll be able to go back and hear all of it right there on the 77 WABC Radio app. We return now to David Schoen, a criminal defense lawyer who has distinguished himself in his representation of President Donald Trump in one of his impeachment trials. David, I wanted to get you on this a couple of weeks ago. President Joe Biden has put forward a package of what he calls Supreme Court reforms. Now, I think it's reasonable to expect that Kamala Harris, were she to be elected, would proceed, because neither one of them came up with those reforms. I don't think either one of them are currently running our current government. That, I think, is being done by a bunch of unelected bureaucrats at the highest level of government, with a healthy assist from President Barack Hussein Obama. But tell us your view on this Supreme Court reform package, because I haven't seen anything this draconian since Franklin Roosevelt, after the U.S. Supreme Court rejected several aspects of his New Deal, attempted to pack the court with a number of new justices, something that was rejected by the body politic in the United States.
Yeah. First of all, I don't buy into their terminology. I don't consider this a reform in any sense, to the extent that word has positive connotations, just like I refuse to use the term progressive to refer to the hate squad. They're regressive. And in this case, this would be a destruction, in my view, of the institution of the Supreme Court. The framers of the Constitution knew what they were doing when they gave lifetime appointments to Supreme Court justices. It's provided for in Article 3, only based on bad behavior. They've been removed from office. They can be impeached if there's a significant problem, impeachment worthy. But otherwise, the main reason they did it was to be free from the politics of the day and political pressures and so on, giving a lifetime appointment. And I think it has worked, allows people to grow in office and to be more discerning in their opinions and so on. I think that has worked. So, one of the things he's trying to do, claims to want to do, and Harris would do if she were president, be to try to get a constitutional amendment passed to change the lifetime appointment to some series of years, 18 years, 20 years, something like that. And I think it's really, really a terrible idea. The other would be to change the number of the justices. Now, the number of the justices has changed many times over the years, from 6 to 9 to 10 to anywhere in between, and an effort to make even more in the Roosevelt administration. This has always been the product of, again, the politics of the day, court packing efforts to try to get one political party more highly represented in the Supreme Court and so on. Again, to me, it's a sacred institution that we don't mess with that way. 9 has worked fine for 150 years. So I just don't like the idea of it. It's just more of this change for change's sake, and it's wrongheaded, especially in a country as polarized as we are right now. We're looking for some sense of normalcy and some sense of portraying strength around the world, not upheaving institutions like the Supreme Court because we don't like any given decision on abortion or some other hot button issue of the day. And we should be careful not to misconstrue what these decisions say, which has happened terribly with the immunity case. The immunity case is nothing more than the same thing we did in the civil context in Nixon versus Fitzgerald, which has stood up quite well through the times. And the reasons apply, and the court said in this case, they apply even more strongly to criminal prosecution when we're talking about official acts. Part of the problem is, President Trump's lawyer, not speaking for President Trump, speaking for himself in response to a question, was asked, that question, what if a president orders SEAL Team 6 to commit a hit on a presidential opponent? Could he be prosecuted? And the guy said, no, he'd have to be impeached first. That's just dead wrong. It has no place in the public dialogue. It's not an official act under any circumstance, period. So we have to be careful of what we say, but we also have to be careful. The media is not careful in construing these decisions. You raised the point earlier about a claim Harris made that President Trump sent armed mobs in. Not only that people weren't armed, he didn't send them in. And he also said he wanted their voices to be heard peacefully. They always cut over that part of the speech and condemn him because they want to condemn him and find something to condemn him for. They're afraid of him because he doesn't put up with a lot of the nonsense. He does believe in this draining the swamp business as he did. They say, well, foreign governments, don't want him in. Yes, because he made NATO pay up. The things that he accomplished, he stuck with the promises he made. You know how many presidential candidates promised to move the embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, the capital that Israel says is their capital? Each one of them, year after year. We have a federal statute that requires them. Each one claimed national security, so they didn't move it. President Trump promised to move it. He moved it. He gave us the Abraham Accords. Nobody said could happen. These are enemies, will never speak to each other. He made it happen. So they're afraid of that kind of thing. The Democratic Party very much wants to hold on to power. And I say this not as a Republican. I represented the Democratic Party twice. I represented a socialist candidate for president in 2020. Not a political issue. It's an issue that cuts at the very framework of our constitutional system and our electoral system we're seeing now. So, just got to play it straight at the polls. Let the American voters decide. One last thing I want to say on that point is, we saw this with Bobby Kennedy, the candidate. The Democratic Party, to an unprecedented degree, this election cycle, went into state after state, challenging Kennedy's candidacy, but the candidacy of third-party candidates all across the country, to an unbelievable degree in this case, really denying people the voice of their own candidate and their own policy position on the ballot. And it's outrageous what they did.
All right. I'm afraid we have to leave it there. When we come back, I'm going to talk about the incredible political development of Robert Kennedy's full-throated endorsement of Donald Trump. Let me thank our guest, David Schoen, a criminal defense attorney, often appears here on the Roger Stone Show. David, thank you so much for making time for us on this Labor Day weekend.
Thank you very much. Great honor.
It's the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC. Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Ronald Reagan.
Tear down this wall.
George W. Bush.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
And Donald Trump.
And a friend of mine for a long time, he only likes politics. If you ask him about how are the Yankees doing, he has no interest. If you ask him almost anything, he likes politics, and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone. This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome back, folks. I'm Roger Stone, and this is the Roger Stone Show with a 3-hour political extravaganza on the most powerful and influential AM radio station in the United States. That would be 77 WABC. We've seen tumultuous things in American politics in just the last 10 days that I could never have foreseen. In my opinion, the unlikely and improbable endorsement of President Donald Trump by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., son of former U.S. Attorney General Bobby Kennedy, who's also a U.S. Senator from the state of New York, is the most significant political development that I've seen in American politics in my lifetime. And I'm a veteran of 13 national presidential campaigns. This is extraordinarily out of the ordinary. I would say the only other event here that is in this kind of realm was Lyndon Johnson's dropping out of the 1968 contest where he could have run for re-election, but because of the unpopularity of the war in Vietnam, he threw in the towel. And then, of course, the shocking decision by President Joe Biden only weeks ago after days of insisting that he was in the race and that only God himself, he said, could get him out of the race. He was bludgeoned out of the race, squeezed out of the race by Barack Obama. And that was glossed over completely in the interview that CNN did with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz this past Thursday night. It's incredible that the people who've been harping about their protection of democracy used an entirely undemocratic process to force Joe Biden from the race and to elevate a candidate for president that no Democrat primary or caucus voter actually voted for. Not only did they not let Bobby Kennedy fairly compete for their nomination, but then they turned around and anointed a candidate with virtually no public support. And despite the best efforts of the mainstream media to characterize RFK as some kind of nut, and the shameful denunciation by members of his own family who evidently think it is forbidden to depart from the progressive left ideology, I think Robert Kennedy established himself as a tireless candidate whose candidacy from the beginning was based on an issue agenda rather than just his own ambition. RFK, full disclosure, he's an acquaintance of mine. I met him once at a health freedom conference in California. There's a photo of both of us, along with Charlene Bollinger, a friend of mine who heads a website called The Truth About Cancer, and General Michael Flynn, who's also speaking at the same conference. That photograph is used as the cornerstone of a left-wing conspiracy on the internet that holds that I, along with Steve Bannon, that's rich, somehow urged Kennedy to run based on the false assumption that Kennedy's candidacy would draw more votes from Joe Biden than it would Donald Trump. All of this conspiracy theory springs from one photograph. It's about the worst case of guilt by association that is imaginable. That claim, of course, is baseless. Now, Robert Kennedy Jr. and I share the same publisher, Tony Lyons of Skyhouse Publishing, and I'd read RFK's book, The Real Anthony Fauci, gave it to many of my friends, as I said earlier, as Christmas gifts. If you haven't read it, it's an extraordinary a book, really impressive. If you have any doubts about his history, his role in the HIV pandemic, his role in the COVID-19 pandemic, I strongly recommend it to you. It's entitled The Real Anthony Fauci. You can find it online. I highly recommend it. But I was impressed by his speech that day at the conference. I've been even more impressed by his efforts on the stump, particularly his uncanny ability to back up any assertion he made in interviews. Anytime I've seen him challenged, in every case, he could cite some government or authoritative study or documentation. about a year and a half ago, I actually wrote this whimsical Substack piece musing about the possibility of a Trump-Kennedy ticket. Based on the brutal treatment of Senator Bernie Sanders by the Democrat Party establishment in the last two presidential elections, I believed from the beginning that the Democrat National Committee would kneecap Bobby Kennedy by contorting the rules to make any intra-party challenge to Biden impossible. And indeed, they did exactly that. They essentially canceled the traditional Iowa caucuses. They told the New Hampshire Democrat Party that they would be stripped of all their delegates to the national convention if they held a primary, even though the primary is mandated by state law, one of the few places in the country where that is the case. They went on to tell Kennedy that if he did not achieve a certain level of the vote in Georgia, that he could not then compete in any subsequent Democrat primary or caucus contest. It was the same manipulation of the rules they used against Bernie Sanders. The difference is that Sanders twice got this treatment and then quietly endorsed first Hillary Clinton and then Joe Biden. See, I used to at least respect Bernie Sanders. I thought he was a real, genuine, sincere socialist, if not a communist. I mean, people are allowed to have their views, but then he sold out to those who give us the unfair trade practices that he complains about. He sells out to those who are committed to endless foreign wars. Maybe that's because in his two campaigns for president, Bernie Sanders and his wife, this is quite legal, but set up a media placement company, skimmed the commission from the placement of all the advertising in his campaigns, and became a millionaire, a multi-millionaire. Maybe that's why Bernie Sanders, the socialist, has 3 homes. He's driving a top-of-the-line Mercedes. See, he likes socialism for the proletariat. He likes socialism for you, just evidently doesn't like it for himself. Now, having briefly left the Republican Party myself in 2012 to support Libertarian Party candidate Governor Gary Johnson, when the Republicans nominated the corporatist robber baron and rhino Mitt Romney, I was painfully aware of how difficult, manpower intensive, complicated, expensive, technical, and legally perilous any minor party or independent candidacy for president is. I thought that Robert Kennedy's prospects as an independent were never viable. At the same time, I did note the enormous amount of grassroots activity, optimism, and excitement that his candidacy did generate. That did not go unnoticed by me. But right there in New York State, you have seen the kind of tactics that the Democrats used, not being satisfied to destroy his candidacy within the Democrat Party. They have spent hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to keep him off the ballot, even as an independent. Now, I also began to realize that RFK was taking a disproportionate number of votes, not from the Democrats, as some believed earlier. Clearly, the Democrats believed that, and they wouldn't have been so active in trying to remove him from the ballot. But I was also shocked by the smear tactics as well as the unbridled lawfare in their efforts to derail his candidacy. I saw Bobby Kennedy the other evening in an interview with Tucker Carlson where he said that that individuals went around to virtually any person he'd ever met in his lifetime, knocked on their door or contacted them saying, "I'm doing research on Robert Kennedy. Have you got any dirt on him?" See, that was meant to get back to Kennedy to try to scare him out of the race. I think, like his father, like his uncle, he is not a man who scares. The recent polling, however, showed that contrary to that popular assumption by the Democrats, that Kennedy's votes actually came disproportionately from Donald Trump, at least in the 7 swing states that matter. Now, it should be noted that there's actually a small percentage of Kennedy voters who are drawn to the process solely by the promise of his candidacy, and they may not have voted for any other candidate. In fact, they, in most cases, probably wouldn't even have voted. Now, whether Robert Kennedy can convert these votes to now vote for Donald Trump, well, that remains to be seen. But a poll that leaked last week from Tony Fabrizio, who is a New Yorker and, to my mind, the single best survey researcher in the Republican Party, showed that in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, and Pennsylvania, as well as Wisconsin, when the vote of Robert Kennedy is redistributed, the benefit is to Trump. So, for example, in Arizona, where RFK was getting 5% of the vote, those votes break 53-28 for Trump. In Georgia, where he was getting 3% of the vote, those votes break 47-34 for Trump. In Michigan, where Kennedy was getting 4% of the vote, those votes break 43-41 for Donald Trump. In North Carolina, which is going to be closer than people think, where Kennedy was up to 3% of the vote, those votes break 48-22 for Donald Trump, overwhelming. In Nevada, this is very interesting, where RFK was getting about 4% of the vote, his votes break 66-16 for Donald Trump. And then lastly, in Wisconsin, where RFK was getting 4% of the vote, his votes break 55-25 for Donald Trump. There is, in each one of those cases, undecideds who were previously voting for Kennedy, double digits in every state, and those are the votes that I think that Robert Kennedy can help move over to Donald Trump. Now, why, of course, is the question as to why a lifelong Democrat, Robert Kennedy, would pull disproportionately from Trump. I think there are 2 reasons, really. First, the mainstream media blackout of Kennedy's candidacy meant that Bobby Kennedy got a disproportionate amount of his coverage from conservative-leaning and alternative media. When either broadcast or cable networks covered RFK, the coverage was largely negative, particularly CNN, where it was vicious. And even in those instances where he was interviewed, they had the audacity to severely edit his interviews. In some cases, I'm thinking about ABC, even in such a way to change what he was saying or to leave false impressions about his positions on the issues. And then, of course, secondly, the reason I think he appealed to Trump voters is his opposition to the war in Ukraine, his demand to seal the border, and his identification of censorship in all medium, but particularly in the internet, that made him very attractive to people who would otherwise have voted for Trump. It is interesting, and I think politically probably astute, that RFK spent virtually no time discussing his position on abortion, where he's essentially for abortion on demand, or on climate change, another issue in which he and I and the president disagree. We do have climate change, by the way, folks. It changes 4 times a year. Then, of course, his very articulately expressed belief that elements of the government, including, yes, the Central Intelligence Agency, were involved in the murder of both his uncle and his father, demonstrates the same deep distrust of the deep state. Dwight Eisenhower called them the military-industrial complex that sought to undermine Trump in the Russian collusion hoax, impeach him, jail him, still a real possibility coming up, I think it is September 18th in a Manhattan courtroom, and more recently, I think, just an opinion, to assassinate him in Butler, Pennsylvania, where we seem to get more answers than we do questions every single day. I saw Bobby Kennedy gave this fascinating interview to Mike Tyson, of all people, which YouTube almost instantaneously removed from the internet, in which he confirmed all of the suspicions and all the research that I had done surrounding the murder of Senator Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Sr., on the night of his greatest political triumph. That would have been his victory in the 1968 Democrat primary. Sirhan, the man accused and convicted of the of the murder of Robert Kennedy, was always in front of Kennedy, shooting wildly. Every bullet shot by Sirhan has been accounted for, but Thomas Noguchi, who is the coroner at the time of L.A. County, quite famous, said that RFK Sr. died from 2 point-blank shots to the left rear of his head, shot from behind. That's why I was excited to see that President Trump announced that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will head a commission on presidential assassination attempts, and pledged that he would release all of the classified documents regarding the Kennedy assassination, something I have urged him to do since 2017. This is, I think, one of the key factors in the ultimate decision by Robert Kennedy to endorse Donald Trump. Very quickly, by the way, followed by the endorsement of former Democrat Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, forming what I think is almost like a new Justice League. Robert Kennedy had a great post when Tulsi Gabbard endorsed Donald Trump. He said, Wonder Woman has joined the Justice League. I loved it. If you're just tuning in, folks, I'm Roger Stone. This is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC. Don't go away, because we'll be right back with a little more politics.
It's The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC. It's The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
And we're back. Folks, remember to tune into The Roger Stone Show here at 77 WABC every Sunday from 3 to 6 for a political extravaganza. Next week, we are looking forward to another great show. Congressman Clay Higgins, who is investigating the attempted assassination of President Donald Trump, is going to join us, as is Rob Schneider, the comedian who was a supporter of President Robert Kennedy. And I want to ask him whether he is now supporting Donald Trump. You can look forward to that next Sunday right here on The Roger Stone Show. I think that Robert Kennedy's form of classic liberalism is actually a throwback to the politics of both his uncle, John F. Kennedy, and his father, Senator Robert Kennedy of New York. Both were ardent anti-communists. JFK enacted an across-the-board tax cut which, as he famously said, lifted all boats. My friend Larry Kudlow has written a terrific book about it. Kennedy also favored a silver-backed dollar. The Kennedys were champions of working class people and the middle class, so completely different from today's Democrats. In 1960, actually, John F. Kennedy, to everyone's surprise, ran to Vice President Richard Nixon's right rather than his left. JFK favored a big defense buildup, a harder line against Castro's Cuba. You know, revisionist history calls the Kennedy brothers liberals when in fact they were despised by party liberals of the day like Eleanor Roosevelt, Adlai Stevenson, and Joseph Rao of the Americans for Democratic Action. President Richard Nixon, who I worked for and knew well, and John F. Kennedy both came to Congress the same year, 1946. They were both low men on the House Labor Committee. They were friends. Richard Nixon was deeply affected by the assassination of JFK, even though it had the inadvertent effect of breathing life back into the political career of one Richard Nixon, who was considered to be politically dead. In fact, after Richard Nixon, as a congressman, successfully exposed communist spy Alger Hiss, John F. Kennedy delivered a campaign contribution to Nixon from Ambassador Joseph P. Kennedy's for Nixon's 1950 race for the U.S. Senate against Helen Gahagan Douglas, a left-wing congresswoman who had been an actress and who we learn later in the books of Robert Caro was actually the mistress of Lyndon Johnson. Indeed, the Kennedys have always been fierce anti-communists and supporters of personal freedom. Robert F. Kennedy was counsel to Senator Joseph McCarthy in his communist hunting days. When Senator Joe McCarthy got married, Robert and Ethel Kennedy were guests at the wedding, and one of the bridesmaids was Pat Lawford, then Pat Kennedy, John and Robert Kennedy's sister. When Joe McCarthy died under suspicious circumstances at the Bethesda Medical Center, we have a great show coming up with J.C. Hawkins, who's going to join us here on the Roger Stone Show to tell us about that. But the only Democrats to show up at McCarthy's funeral were Robert and Ethel Kennedy. So indeed, the Kennedys were fierce anti-communists and supporters of personal freedom. But to his credit, Robert Kennedy elevated the issue of health freedom through his reasoned critique of vaccinations. And now I think he's elevated a very important issue, that of chronic disease, which is an epidemic in the United States, which is making Americans, particularly children, both obese and unhealthy. That Robert Kennedy has been able to convince President Trump to look at and to work against the poisoning of our food as the root cause of this illness, that in itself is a major accomplishment. It ultimately became clear that RFK's candidacy hurt Trump more than any Democrat. I will admit that, even I criticized his position of abortion and climate change during that period. But as I told you, polling more recently shows that he was taking more votes from Trump than he was from the Democrats. To his credit, Kennedy has elevated the discussion of the most important issues in 2024, including the lack of affordable housing, the disappearance of the middle class, which Kamala Harris gave lip service to in her interview with Tim Walz on CNN the other night. But I think that Donald Trump's drive for the presidency can only benefit now from Kennedy being within the Trump inner circle and actually hitting the stump. In an interview with Dr. Phil last week, Kennedy said that he would be actively campaigning for Trump. And then former Democrat Congresswoman and 2020 Democrat presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard announced her formal endorsement, introduced President Trump in Wisconsin late last week. This is, my friends, the beginnings of a new political realignment in America, forging a new majority coalition that includes Republicans, independents, libertarians, free thinkers, and anyone who thinks America is in trouble because of our current policies. This is going to change the face of America. I stand by that prediction. We have a new Justice League, folks. It is Donald Trump, Senator J.D. Vance, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and Tulsi Gabbard. This is going to be one of the closest, hardest fought presidential races in American history. But I, as an old warhorse who smells smoke, I sense victory. Thanks for joining us today on the Roger Stone Show here at 77 WABC Radio. And don't go away, because my good friend Joe Piscopo will be right along on this Labor Day weekend with Sundays with Sinatra.